The gray hoodie was my armor. It was 3 sizes too big, a shapeless, charcoal-colored shroud that did a perfect job of muting the curve of my shoulders and the color of my eyes. In a pack where status was measured in the sheen of one's coat and the sharpness of one's presence, I had spent 10 years mastering the art of the ghost. I walked with my head down, shoulders hunched, becoming a smudge of static in the vibrant, predatory life of the Silver Ridge Pack. Hello everyone. I am so incredibly happy to have you back here in our storytelling sanctuary. Before we pull back the curtain on this decade-long secret, where are you all tuning in from today? Drop your location in the comments. I love reading them. And if you're ready to see how the most invisible girl in the pack becomes the center of a king's world, please make sure you've hit that subscribe button. Your support is the magic that keeps these tales unfolding. Are you ready to see who was watching her all along? I was nothing. That was the point. I was the girl who sat at the back of the mess hall, the one who cleaned the archives when the sun went down, the one whose scent, earth, old paper and rain, was easily overlooked amidst the overwhelming musk of the warriors. Elara Vance. That was my name, though most people just called me the girl in the gray. I kept my head down because, in this world, being noticed meant being targeted. I was a lowborn, a human hybrid with no rank, no pack standing, and absolutely no desire to be on the radar of the man who sat on the obsidian throne. Alpha King Kalen Thorne was not a man, he was a legend. He was the kind of person who didn't walk into a room so much as he redefined the atmosphere. He was cold, calculated, and terrifyingly powerful. If he looked at you, it felt like being dissected by a laser. And for 10 years, I had successfully managed to be the only person in the entire territory he had never, not once, acknowledged. Or so I thought. The trouble started on the eve of the Lunar Gala, the one night of the year where even the Invisibles were required to attend the ceremonial banquet. I had spent hours trying to make myself look even more drab, pinning my hair back with a rusted clip and choosing a dress that was essentially a sack of fabric. I wanted to fade into the wallpaper. I was carrying a stack of ledger books to the archives when the heavy oak doors of the great hall swung open. The entire pack went silent. Kalen was walking through, his black cloak trailing behind him like smoke. He stopped. Dead in his tracks. The air in the hallway vanished. He didn't look at the beta. He didn't look at the council. He turned his head, slowly like a predator tracking prey, and fixed his gaze directly on me. His eyes were a startling icy blue, piercing through the gloom of the corridor. You, he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that sent a tremor through the floorboards. Stay. The rest of you leave us. I froze, the heavy books pressing against my chest. My heart was a panicked bird slamming against my ribs. Why me? As the others filed out, casting confused, jealous, and suspicious glances in my direction, Kalen moved. He crossed the distance between us with a terrifying, fluid grace that made my breath catch. He didn't stop until he was inches from me, his presence radiating a heat that felt like a sun-scorched desert. He reached out, his long, calloused fingers hovering just beneath my chin, not quite touching, but close enough that I could feel the electricity vibrating off his skin. 10 years, Elara, he whispered, his voice laced with a raw, agonizing intensity that didn't match his cold reputation. 10 years of watching you hide. Do you really think I'm that blind? The mystery of his fixation hit me, but the question that followed froze me to the marrow. If he had been watching me for a decade, why had he waited until now to tear down my wall? Is this the start of a royal romance? Or is Elara about to be dragged into a game of power she never wanted to play? Kalen's fingers remained poised just inches from my jaw, a tantalizing bridge of heat between us. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even drop my gaze. He was the sun, and I was a creature of the dark, and his proximity threatened to burn me to ash. I am Elara Vance. For a decade, my life has been a calculated routine of avoidance. I work in the lower archives, cataloging the history of a pack that doesn't care if I exist. I don't wear silk, I wear wool. I don't stand in the light, I hug the perimeter of the room. My deepest desire is simply to be left alone. To live a life where no one demands my strength, my loyalty, or my blood. But my deepest fear? It's being seen. Because to be seen by a Lycan of Kalen's stature is to be owned. And then there is Kalen Thornmiller, the Alpha King. He is the pinnacle of the Silver Ridge hierarchy, a man burdened by the weight of a throne he never asked for and the expectations of a pack that thrives on violence. He is sharp, ruthless, and terrifyingly efficient. But hidden behind his facade of cold authority is a man suffocating in isolation. As he stood before me in the dim hallway, I realized that for 10 years, while I had been carefully crafting my invisibility, he had been doing the exact opposite. He had been tracking my every move. He wasn't just my king, he had been my silent, distant watcher. "You think you've been invisible," Kalen said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate register that made my skin crawl with a confusing electric sensation. "You think you've hidden from the world. But you haven't been hiding, Alara. You've been waiting." "I don't know what you're talking about," I managed to whisper, my pulse hammering in my neck. He finally lowered his hand, though his eyes never left mine. "I know everything about you. I know you prefer the silence of the library to the noise of the Great Hall. I know you leave bread out for the birds near the East Perimeter every Tuesday. I know you read poetry when you think no one is watching." My heart stopped. The East Perimeter was strictly forbidden to commoners. I had been terrified that someone would notice me there. "How?" "Because," he said, and for a split second his ironclad composure flickered, revealing a raw, aching loneliness. "Because you are the only real thing in a world of wolves who only care about the hunt. You are the only thing that keeps me tethered to my humanity." A figure stepped from the shadows behind Kalen. It was Soren Blackwood, Kalen's lifelong friend and the pack's head enforcer. Soren was everything Kalen wasn't: jovial, boisterous, and perpetually dangerous. He looked at me with a mixture of amusement and genuine bewilderment. "So this is the one," Soren said, his eyes scanning me with a detached, professional curiosity. "The invisible girl. Kalen, you've been holding a candle for a ghost for 10 years, and you pick the night of the gala to make your move." "She isn't a ghost, Soren," Kalen snapped, his voice turning into the sharp, commanding edge of a monarch. "She is my choice." "Your choice?" I echoed, my voice rising in panic. "I am not a choice. I am a person." Kalen looked at me, and in those icy blue eyes, I saw something that terrified me far more than his authority: devotion. A decade of it, silent and suffocating. "You don't understand, Alara," he said, stepping back, his posture stiffening as the reality of our positions set in. "The pack is changing. The shadow scent is growing. If I don't bind you to my side, the council will notice your difference. And if they notice you, they won't see a girl. They will see a threat." I looked down at my worn gray sleeves. I had tried so hard to be nothing, yet here I was, standing at the center of a king's decade-long obsession. Is Kalen truly protecting me, or is his protection just another name for possession? And what is this shadow scent that has the king so afraid? Does this reveal make you suspicious of the king, or do you find his long-game love romantic? Let me know in the comments. And if you're enjoying this slow-burn tension, please subscribe. We're about to hit the inciting incident, and the stakes are about to get personal. The hallway suddenly felt smaller, the air growing thick with the scent of ozone and something sharper, a metallic underlying rot that made the fine hairs on my neck stand up. Kalen stiffened, his head snapping toward the distant vaulted windows of the palace. "It's here," Kalen growled, his voice shifting from the intimate whisper he'd used for me to a low, predatory snarl. Soren stepped forward, his jovial mask dropping to reveal a face hardened by years of brutal pack defense. "They didn't just come to the perimeter, Kalen. They're inside the walls. The shadow scent is masking their approach. They're targeting the archives." My lungs seized. The archives. My archives. The place where I kept the records of the pack's history, the genealogy of bloodlines that went back centuries. "Why?" I gasped, my voice barely audible. Kalen didn't answer. He moved with a speed that blurred the air, pinning me against the cold stone wall, his hands on either side of my head. For a moment, the intensity of his blue eyes held me captive, a mixture of desperate protection and raw, unvarnished hunger. "Because they are looking for the invisible key," Kalen said, his voice urgent. "And you, Alara, are the only one who has catalogued the lineage of the first Alpha. They think you know where the blood seal is hidden." "I don't know anything," I cried, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his chest. "You do," he countered, his thumbs grazing my jawline, a touch so tender it felt like a betrayal of the chaos around us. "You've spent 10 years cleaning those shelves, reading the forbidden scrolls, cataloging the truth of our history while everyone else was busy posturing for power. You are the only person who knows that the king's crown is a lie. Boom. A massive explosion echoed from the library wing. The shockwave rattled the chandelier above us, showering us in shards of crystal. Screams erupted from the great hole, the sound of the gala turning into a slaughterhouse. Soren, take her to the safe room, Kaelin commanded, stepping back. No. I reached out, grabbing his sleeve. The heavy wool of his cloak was rough under my fingers. Kaelin, if they get to the blood seal, they can usurp the throne. They can rewrite the pack's history. Kaelin looked at me, and for the first time in 10 years he didn't see an invisible girl. He saw a peer. He saw the only soul in the palace who understood the danger. He leaned in, his lips brushing my temple in a gesture that was half vow, half desperation. Then don't let them find it, he whispered. Run, Alara. But for the love of all that is holy, do not hide. If you hide, they will find you. If you fight, they will never see you coming. He turned to the encroaching shadows, his skin rippling as the transformation took him, not into a beast but into a mountain of silver-gray power. He didn't look back. He leaped into the fray, his roar shattering the windows and signaling the start of a war I never wanted. Soren grabbed my arm, his grip firm but urgent. Move, Alara. The king has given you his protection, but you have to earn your own survival now. We sprinted toward the library, the smell of burning paper and ancient dust filling the air. I realized then that my decade of being invisible had left me with a unique advantage. I knew every secret crawlspace, every hidden lever and every forgotten truth in this building. I wasn't just a librarian anymore. I was the keeper of the secret that would either save this kingdom or burn it to the ground. The war for the throne has begun, and Alara is at the center of it. Can she navigate the secrets of the archives before the invaders find her? Or will her past silence be her downfall? I am absolutely on the edge of my seat. If you think Alara is going to prove everyone wrong, type power in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now. The tension is only going to skyrocket from here. You won't want to miss part 4. The library was a labyrinth of smoke and shadow. Burning tapestries curled like dying fingers toward the vaulted ceiling, and the scent of singed parchment, my life's work, was an agonizing perfume. Soren surged ahead, his claws raking through the dark as he took down 2 intruders who were tearing at the central dais. To the vault, Alara. Soren barked, his voice straining against the guttural snarls of the pack invaders. The king's lineage isn't just paper. It's the anchor for the entire Silver Ridge wards. I didn't argue. I sprinted, my oversized gray hoodie flapping like a tattered wing. Every shadow in the room seemed to reach for me, but I knew these aisles better than I knew my own reflection. I ducked behind a falling bookshelf, hearing the splintering wood of the floorboards as the shadowstalkers tore through the outer perimeter. I reached the hidden mechanism behind the bust of the first alpha, a small, unassuming brass lever I'd cleaned 1,000 times. I pulled it and the stone wall shuddered, revealing a narrow, spiraling staircase that led deep into the bowels of the mountain. As I descended, the temperature plummeted. This was the true archive of blood. It wasn't filled with books, but with crystalline vials glowing with the soft, pulsating light of royal history. Suddenly, a hand clamped over my mouth, dragging me into the darkness of a side alcove. I struggled, but the grip was like iron. A familiar, clean scent, cedar, ozone, and wet rain filled my senses. My pulse steadied instantly. It was him. You shouldn't have come down here, Kaelin hissed against my ear. He was back in human form, though his chest was heaving and a deep, jagged gash ran down his forearm. The blood was dark, shimmering with a faint, unnatural violet hue. The shadow scent. It's not just a mask, Alara. It's a poison. They've tainted the lineage lines. You're hurt, I whispered, my hands trembling as I reached for the wound. He caught my wrists, his eyes burning with a mix of fury and intense, possessive need. Don't touch it. It's cursed. They wanted me to bleed so the vault would recognize a broken king and lock you inside forever. Why me? I asked, my voice finally cracking. Why am I the key, Kaelin? I'm just a librarian. I'm nobody. He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. The tension between us was a physical force, pulling us together despite the chaos erupting just floors above. You are the only person who hasn't tried to claim the throne. Your blood is untainted by the greed of the pack. The vault doesn't recognize royalty, Alara. It recognizes honesty. And you are the most honest thing I have ever known. He pulled away, his expression hardening. Soren is dying out there. The invaders are led by someone who knows our every move. Someone from the inner council. Who? I don't know yet. But you have to finish the ritual. You have to pour the vial of the first alpha into the basin. If you do, the wards will reset and purge the poison from the palace. If you don't. He looked at the shadows creeping down the stairs. Then we lose everything. I looked at the vial. It was heavy, pulsing with a golden light. I felt the weight of 10 years of invisibility dropping away. I wasn't the girl in the gray hoodie anymore. I was the last defense of a kingdom that didn't even know my name. I'll do it, I said, my voice steadying. I know, Kalen murmured, his hand lingering on my waist. For a second the world fell away. There was no war, no throne, only the heat of him and the sudden, terrifying realization that I had loved this man from afar for every single one of those 10 years. Go, he ordered, pushing me toward the basin. I'll hold the stairs. If I fall, you don't look back. You finish the ritual. That is an alpha's command. I didn't look back. I reached the basin, but as I uncorked the vial, I realized something that turned my blood to ice. The basin wasn't empty. There was a letter sitting in the center, written in a hand I recognized perfectly, my own handwriting from an essay I'd written years ago and lost. How did my own writing get into the most guarded vault in the kingdom? And if Kalen has been watching me for a decade, has he been manipulating me, or was he protecting me from a trap that started long before I knew he existed? The mystery is deepening. Do you think Alara can trust Kalen, or is he playing a long game? Type trust or traitor in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. The midpoint revelation is coming, and it's going to shake everything you thought you knew about the Alpha King. The paper was yellowed at the edges, the ink faded just enough to make my heart stutter. It was my handwriting. My own loops and slants from an essay I had written in secret during my first year as a pack servant, tucked deep inside a hollowed-out book that I thought no one had ever touched. I picked up the note. It wasn't just my handwriting. It was my soul poured onto the page. A list of observations about the pack's history, identifying the exact inconsistencies that would eventually lead to a civil war. I had hidden that paper to protect myself, to make sure that if I ever needed to leave, I had the truth in my pocket. How did it get here? You're wondering how it found its way into the king's vault. A voice purred from the darkness behind the basin. I spun around. It wasn't Kalen. It was Soren. He was leaning against the cold stone, his clothes torn, his face smeared with dark violet blood. But he wasn't wounded. He was smiling, a jagged, chilling expression that didn't reach his eyes. Soren. I breathed, my hand tightening around the vial. What are you doing here? Kalen is fighting them off. Kalen is doing exactly what I need him to do, Soren interrupted, stepping into the light of the basin. He's being a hero. He's dying for a throne that doesn't actually exist. My knees felt weak. What are you talking about? Soren gestured to the vial in my hand. That isn't the blood of the first alpha, Alara. That's a concentrated form of the shadow scent. Kalen thinks that pouring it into the basin will reset the wards, but he's wrong. It will collapse them. It will turn every wolf in this pack, including our dear Alpha, into a mindless thrall of the void. The air left my lungs. The man I had idolized, the man who had apparently been protecting me for 10 years, had been led into a trap by his own brother-in-arms. And I, the invisible librarian, was the one holding the catalyst. Why? I demanded, my voice trembling. Why destroy your own people? Soren walked closer, his presence feeling like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Because Kalen stopped being a king the moment he set eyes on you, Alara. He grew soft. He stopped hunting. He started watching. A king who spends his nights looking through the windows of the archives instead of patrolling his borders is a king who needs to be replaced. I didn't hate him, Alara. I just needed him to fail. He reached out, his hand hovering over mine. Give me the vial. You're a smart girl. You've spent 10 years in the shadows. You know what happens when the light dies. The shadows are where you finally get to be free. Join me. We'll rule the ashes. My mind raced. Kalen hadn't been manipulating me. He had been protecting me from Soren. The decade of watching wasn't obsession. It was a frantic attempt to keep the only thing he loved away from the man who was systematically dismantling his kingdom. You're wrong, I said, my voice hardening. You think you've won because I'm invisible. You think because no one looks at me, no one sees what you're doing. No one does see what I'm doing, Soren laughed. That's the beauty of it. They don't have to see you, I countered, the golden light of the vial reflecting in my eyes. They just have to hear the truth. I didn't hand him the vial. Instead, I smashed it against the base of the basin. The result wasn't a reset of the wards, and it wasn't a collapse into the void. It was a release of pure, unfiltered memory. The liquid didn't vanish. It evaporated into a thick, golden mist that began to seep through the ventilation shafts of the entire palace, carrying with it the psychic echo of Soren's confession. Every wolf in the Silver Ridge pack just heard the head enforcer admit to treason. Soren's face twisted in rage. You stupid, insignificant girl. He lunged for me, his fingernails lengthening into obsidian claws, but before he could reach my throat, the vault doors flew open. Kalen stood there, his eyes glowing with a terrifying absolute light. He wasn't bleeding anymore. He was the storm. The truth is out, but Soren is cornered and desperate. Can Kalen and Alara survive the fury of a traitor who has nothing left to lose? My heart is racing. Did you see that move Alara made? If you're cheering for Alara to take down the traitor, type justice in the comments. And make sure you're subscribed. The darkest hour is upon us, and the sacrifice required to end this might be more than the Alpha King can pay. The air in the vault shattered as Kalen slammed into Soren. It wasn't a fight. It was the collision of two titans, a blur of fur and fangs that turned the pristine archives into a slaughterhouse. Soren, no longer hiding his betrayal, shifted into a nightmarish, jagged wolf, his fur matted with the same violet poison that had tainted Kalen earlier. You weak, sentimental fool. Soren roared, his voice distorted by his shifting form. He slashed at Kalen, his claws tearing through the Alpha's chest. You spent 10 years staring at a library girl while the pack rotted from the inside. You don't deserve the crown. Kalen roared back, but it was a pained, struggling sound. The poison, the violet stain that had been lingering in his system, was reacting to the proximity of the shattered vial. His limbs were shaking, his fur turning brittle and gray as the corruption seized his nervous system. He collapsed to his knees, his massive frame shuddering. Kalen! I screamed, lunging forward, but Soren caught me by the hair, throwing me aside. My head slammed into the stone dais and the world tilted violently. Everything went blurry. I could hear the wet, heavy thuds of blows, the snapping of bone, and then, the most terrifying sound of all, the sudden, absolute silence. I blinked, the back of my head throbbing with a dull, sickening heat. Soren stood over Kalen, who was pinned to the ground, his chest barely rising. Soren's shadow loomed over him, a dark, pulsing entity that seemed to feed on the king's fading vitality. Look at him, Alara, Soren taunted, his hand wrapped around Kalen's throat. The mighty Alpha King. The invisible protector. He failed to protect his pack and he failed to protect you. Soren looked at me, his eyes glowing with that sickening violet light. I'm going to kill him, and then I'm going to make you watch as I burn these archives to the ground. You spent your life in the shadows? You're going to die in them. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't obey. I was trapped. I looked at Kalen, and his eyes, the icy blue I had memorized from 10 years of watching him from afar, were dimming. He wasn't looking at Soren. He was looking at me. His lips barely moved, a ghost of a whisper that only I could hear. Run, Lara. Use the seal. But there was no seal left. The vial was shattered. The ritual was broken. I felt the cold grip of absolute despair. For a decade I had been the girl who stayed hidden, the girl who didn't matter. I had finally stepped into the light, and it was going to be the last thing I ever saw. Soren began to channel the power of the void, a black vortex forming in his palm, ready to snuff out the king's soul. Kalen's eyes closed. His chest stopped moving. The silence grew heavy, suffocating. I realized then that I wasn't just a librarian. I was the witness. If I died here, the truth of the last decade died with me. The memory of the man who had loved me from the shadows, the man who had been the only person to ever really see me, that would be erased. I wouldn't let him be forgotten. I crawled forward, my fingers digging into the stone floor, my nails breaking. I didn't reach for a weapon. I reached for the broken shards of the vial, the gold-flecked glass that still held the remnants of the Alpha's lineage. Soren, I whispered. He turned, a cruel smirk on his face. Yes, little ghost? You forgot the most important rule of the library, I gasped, blood dripping into my eyes. Everything has an index. I pressed the sharpest shard of the vial into the palm of my hand. My blood, a hybrid human-tainted essence, mixed with the golden residue of the Alpha's history. The vault didn't need a ritual. It needed a sacrifice. The entire chamber began to glow with a blinding white-hot intensity. The shadow vortex in Soren's hand hissed and began to dissolve. But the light wasn't coming from the vault. It was coming from me. The darkness is total and the Alpha King is near death. Can Alara's sacrifice be enough to turn the tide, or has she just handed the win to the traitor? I'm honestly struggling to hold it together. If you're rooting for Alara's comeback, type "Rise" in the comments. And please subscribe. The turning point is coming next and you will not believe who shows up to help them. The light wasn't just a flicker. It was a deluge. It erupted from the palm of my hand, a blinding, searing white brilliance that tasted like ozone and forgotten history. As the light hit the stone floor, the ancient wards of the Silver Ridge, dormant for centuries, surged to life. The vault began to hum, a low, resonant frequency that vibrated in my very teeth. Soren shrieked, clutching his face as the golden light tore through the violet poison manifesting on his skin. He was a creature of shadow and he couldn't survive the truth of the lineage I had just unleashed. No. This isn't possible. Soren howled, stumbling back as the very walls of the archives began to glow with the names and deeds of every Alpha who had come before Kalen. The light didn't stop at the walls. It streamed through the cracks in the ceiling, a beacon piercing the midnight sky of the Silver Ridge territory. It wasn't just a physical light, it was a psychic transmission. The pack, scattered in confusion and fear by the coup, looked up to see the archives glowing like a fallen star. They felt the truth. They felt the betrayal. And they felt the presence of their king. Alara. Kalen's voice was a ragged rasp. I ignored the agony in my hand, my blood pooling into the stone, sealing the circuit. Get up, Kalen. Finish it. Kalen surged to his feet, fueled by the sudden, overwhelming surge of the ancestral wards. He wasn't the poison man anymore. He was the embodiment of the pack's history. He didn't use fangs or claws. He used the authority of the throne. Soren Blackwood. Kalen's voice cracked like thunder, amplified by the vault's acoustics. You have broken the blood oath. By the mandate of the first Alpha, I strip you of your rank, your pack, and your scent. Soren fell to his knees, his body twisting as the ancestral magic stripped the wolf from his soul. He didn't die, but he was cast out, stripped of his power, turned into a mere mortal, an outcast to be hunted by the very wolves he had tried to betray. He scrambled toward the shadows, sobbing, his authority erased in an instant. But the real turning point wasn't the traitor's fall. It was the silence that followed. Kalen didn't turn to the exit. He didn't care about the pack gathering outside. He collapsed toward me, his hands catching me just as my strength failed. We hit the floor, surrounded by the fading glow of the ancient records. You idiot, Kalen whispered, his breath warm against my forehead. He was cradling my wounded hand, his touch surprisingly gentle, his eyes frantic with a fear I hadn't seen before. You sacrificed your blood to the vault? Do you have any idea what that does to a human hybrid? I saved the pack, I breathed, my head resting on his chest. You saved me, he corrected, his voice thick with a raw, unshakable intensity. You gave me a future, Alara. You gave me the right to finally step out of the shadows with you. The vault doors groaned open. The palace guards, loyalists who had seen the light, rushed in, but they stopped dead at the threshold. They saw their king, the most terrifying man in the territory, cradling the invisible girl in the gray hoodie, his face pressed against her hair as if she were the only oxygen left in the world. For 10 years, I had walked through these halls wanting to be unseen. But as Kalen pulled me closer, his heart hammering against mine, I realized I didn't want to be invisible anymore. I wanted to be exactly where I was. The traitor is banished and the king is alive. But with the wards now permanently linked to Alara's blood, how can she ever go back to being the invisible librarian she once was? I'm honestly crying. That was so beautiful. If you love a hero who finally gets his queen, type king in the comments. And please subscribe. The climactic resolution is coming, and trust me, you are not prepared for the final, emotional twist. The archives were silent, save for the hum of the cooling wards. Kalen was no longer the poison-riddled king. He was a man reclaimed, holding on to me as if the world might shatter if he let go. But the tension in the room remained, a new, sharper edge. The palace was filled with the scents of 100 different wolves, all waiting for a signal. The coup had failed, but the kingdom was still in flames. The doors to the vault remained open, framing the silhouettes of the Pack Council. They had seen the light. They had felt the surge of ancestral magic. They knew that the invisible librarian was no longer just a servant. She was the one who held the keys to their existence. Kalen rose, lifting me easily into his arms. He didn't offer me a choice. He walked toward the light of the upper halls. As we stepped out of the vault, the entire pack, hundreds of wolves from the lowest laborers to the most powerful warriors, kneeled. They didn't kneel for the crown. They knelt for the blood that had been spilled to save them. But then the final twist hit me. Standing at the front of the council was not a loyalist, but General Thorne Vance, the aging leader of the border guards and Kalen's own uncle. He looked at me, then at Kalen, his face a mask of sorrow. "You've done it, King," the general said, his voice echoing in the hall. "You've bonded the blood seal to a human hybrid. You have stabilized the wards, but at a cost. The law of the first alpha is absolute. A king who shares his power with a human hybrid cannot rule alone. The pack will see this as weakness, Kalen. They will demand a trial by fire. If you do not execute the girl, they will execute you both." The silence was absolute. My heart stopped. I had saved them, and their reward was my death. Kalen didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the general. He walked right up to him, his presence so immense that even the veteran general took a step back. "The law of the first alpha," Kalen said, his voice cold as a glacier, "was written to protect the pack from monsters. But look around you. The monster was the one who preached that law while plotting to destroy us from within. The wards didn't just recognize Alara's blood, they validated her heart." Kalen turned to the crowd, his voice booming. "For 10 years you ignored her. For 10 years you treated her as less than nothing. And yet she was the only one who stood for us when the darkness came. If you want a trial, then let it be a trial of my rule. I am the Alpha King, and this is my Luna. If you strike at her, you strike at the very blood that keeps your home standing." He turned to me, his gaze softening into something so intimate it felt like a private prayer. He pulled a small silver band from his own finger, the signet of the Thornmiller line, and slid it onto mine over the jagged scar where I had cut my palm. "I don't need a crown," he whispered for only me to hear. "I need the woman who made me a man." The general lowered his head, and one by one the others followed. They weren't just bowing to the king. They were bowing to the girl who had been invisible for a decade, realizing that she had been the only one really keeping the pack together all along. The pack has bent the knee, and the king has chosen his queen. But can Alara truly step out of the shadows and embrace a life where every eye is on her? Or will the weight of the throne become a new kind of prison? I'm breathless. Kalen finally made his choice, and the pack has no power to stop him. If you're loving this ending, type Queen in the comments. And please subscribe for the satisfying conclusion. We have one final heartwarming surprise for you. The morning sun hit the high windows of the palace, bathing the stone floors in a golden warmth that felt like a forgiveness. The riots were over, the traitor was a ghost in the wilderness, and for the first time in a century the Silver Ridge Pack wasn't just a collection of territorial wolves. It was a community. I stood on the balcony overlooking the vast, snow-dusted valley. The gray hoodie was gone, replaced by a dress of simple midnight blue silk. A color that didn't hide me but didn't demand the spotlight either. I felt the cool breeze on my skin, and for once I didn't feel the urge to pull my shoulders in. I belonged here. "You look like you're plotting a new library layout," a voice murmured from behind me. I turned as Kalen stepped onto the terrace. He looked different without the heavy mantle of his royal cloak. He wore a simple linen shirt, his sleeves rolled up to reveal the forearms scarred from the battle. He wasn't the distant, untouchable Alpha King anymore. He was just Kalen. "I was actually thinking about the archives," I admitted, stepping into his reach. He pulled me against his chest, his arms wrapping around me with a familiar, grounding pressure. "I think the pack needs more than just history books. They need to know their own stories. The real ones. Not the ones written by the councils to maintain control." Kalen kissed the top of my head, his scent of cedar and rain wrapping around me like a promise. Then it's a good thing I have the most intelligent woman in the territory to lead that effort. You've spent a decade being invisible, Alara. Now the pack is going to learn how to truly see. We stood there for a long moment, watching the pack scouts head out into the morning, not as warriors on a crusade but as guardians of a home. The fear that had defined my life, the fear of being noticed, of being targeted, of being a fraud, had evaporated. I realized then that my invisibility hadn't been a weakness. It had been my training. I had spent 10 years learning the heart of this pack, its secrets, its pain, and its potential. I knew exactly who they were, and because of that, I knew exactly how to love them. Leo, the young boy from our previous journey, who had become a frequent mischievous visitor to the palace, came racing onto the balcony, breathless and grinning. Alara. Kaelin. The spring thaw has started. The river is finally open. Kaelin laughed, a sound that still made my heart flutter. He looked down at me, his icy blue eyes glowing with a warmth that felt like home. We have a kingdom to build, my queen. But first the river is calling. I took his hand, the silver signet on my finger catching the light. We walked out together into the life I had never dared to dream of, leaving the shadows behind for good. I had spent 10 years waiting to be found, never realizing that the man who loved me had been waiting for the exact same thing. We weren't just a king and his Luna anymore. We were two people who had finally stepped out of the dark into a dawn that was all our own. And that, my dear viewers, is the story of how the girl who lived in the shadows finally found her place in the sun. I'm so happy we could share this journey together, from the quiet, dusty shelves of the archives to the steps of the throne. Seeing Alara find her voice and her love has been an absolute honor. I want to know, did you enjoy the mystery of the archives as much as I did? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to tell me what kind of story you want to see next. Should we go for something magical, something mysterious, or something heart-wrenching? If you loved this tale, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you're the first to hear our next epic. Thank you for your kindness, your comments, and your company. Until next time, stay brave, stay kind, and remember, you are always worthy of being seen. See you in the next story.